Imagine your homeland facing an unstoppable force, the most powerful army in the world, ready to invade and conquer. Japan in 1281 was on the brink of being overrun by the Mongol Empire, led by the formidable Kublai Khan. His massive fleet seemed unstoppable, but then something incredible happened. A typhoon struck with such fury that it changed the course of history. This storm, known as the Kamikaze or Divine Wind, not only destroyed the Mongol invasion fleet, but also became a symbol of Japan's spiritual protection. Welcome to Armchair Archaeology, where we uncover the pivotal moments that shaped history. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, we'll reveal a surprising way this legendary storm still impacts Japan today. Before we dive into this incredible story of war, storms, and survival, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our historical deep dives on Armchair Archaeology. Now, let's explore how one of the most powerful empires in history came to face an unexpected force that would change everything. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire was at the height of its power, stretching from Eastern Europe to the shores of the Pacific. Under the leadership of Kublai Khan, the Mongol Empire had become the largest contiguous empire in history, unrivaled in its military might. Kublai, the ambitious grandson of Genghis Khan, sought to further expand his empire by turning his attention to Japan, a land that had remained outside Mongol control for Kublai. Japan represented both a strategic target and an opportunity to consolidate Mongol dominance over East Asia. Kublai Khan's conquests in China, where he established the Yuan dynasty, gave him a launching point for further expansion eastward. In 1268, he sent envoys to Japan demanding that the country submit to Mongol rule and pay tribute, a common Mongol strategy to avoid costly invasions. The ruling Kamakura shogunate, however, refused to bow to the Mongols, rejecting the demand and sending the envoys back. Japan's military leaders believed that the seas surrounding their island would be enough to protect them from foreign invaders, and their long history of isolation only reinforced this confidence. Undeterred, Kublai Khan began preparing for an invasion. His empire's military prowess was unmatched, employing innovative battle tactics, advanced weaponry, and a formidable cavalry. The Mongols had conquered vast territories across Asia, defeating armies much larger than Japan's. With this track record, Kublai believed that Japan would fall quickly under Mongol control. But despite Kublai's plans and the Mongol Empire's military superiority, Japan's fate would not be decided by men. It would be determined by the unpredictable forces of nature, something no army could prepare for. Kublai Khan's first attempt to conquer Japan came in 1274. He assembled a fleet of approximately 900 ships, carrying a mixed force of around 23,000 Mongol, Chinese, and Korean soldiers. This formidable army, equipped with advanced weaponry, including gunpowder bombs, set sail across the East China Sea and landed on the island of Kyushu. The Japanese defenders, mainly samurai warriors, were caught off guard by the Mongol army's coordinated tactics and superior technology. Unlike the traditional Japanese style of one-on-one combat, the Mongols employed large-scale, organized assaults. They launched explosive projectiles that stunned the samurai, and their tightly coordinated attacks were unlike anything the Japanese forces had encountered before. The samurai fought bravely, but they were not prepared for the Mongols' tactics and weaponry. It seemed like the invasion would be a success for Kublai Khan. However, after just a few days of fighting, a sudden and fierce storm swept through the region. The violent winds and waves damaged many of the Mongol ships, forcing the invaders to retreat. The Japanese saw this as a stroke of luck, but the threat was far from over. The Mongols thought they'd return stronger next time, but nature had other plans. Want more incredible stories like this? Hit subscribe and keep exploring. Though the Mongols had been driven back, Japan understood that Kublai Khan was not done, and the next invasion would likely be much larger and deadlier. This first invasion marked the beginning of Japan's understanding of the Mongol threat, as well as their realization that they needed to prepare for a more formidable attack. What Japan couldn't know at the time was that once again, nature would play a crucial role in their survival. After the 1274 invasion, Japan knew it had been fortunate, but fortune alone wouldn't be enough to stop the Mongols next time. The Kamakura shogunate began preparing for an inevitable second invasion, and this time they were determined to be ready. They immediately focused on strengthening coastal defenses, particularly on the island of Kyushu, where the first Mongol fleet had landed. One of the most significant defense efforts was the construction of the Genko Burui, a stone wall along the Hakata Bay coastline. Standing about 2 meters high, this wall was built to prevent Mongol ships from easily landing and unloading their troops. In addition, fortifications and watchtowers were erected to monitor any incoming fleets, and local samurai were mobilized and trained for large-scale defensive warfare. Alongside physical preparations, the Japanese turned to spiritual protection. Shinto rituals and Buddhist prayers were conducted across the country, with priests and monks asking the kami, spiritual beings in the Shinto faith, for protection. The Japanese belief in divine intervention was strong, and many hoped that the gods would once again help defend the nation from foreign invaders. These preparations reflected a significant shift in Japan's defensive strategy. Traditionally, samurai warfare involved small-scale skirmishes and personal duels, but this threat required a coordinated national effort. The lessons learned from the 1274 invasion were clear. Japan needed to be ready for a larger, more organized attack. When Kublai Khan's second invasion came in 1281, Japan would be prepared. But once again, the forces of nature would play a decisive role in the outcome. Kublai Khan was determined not to repeat the mistakes of 1274. In 1281, he launched a much larger and more ambitious invasion of Japan. This time, he assembled 2 fleets, one from Korea with about 40,000 soldiers, and a second, larger force from southern China, carrying around 100,000 men. Together, these fleets formed one of the largest invasion forces in history, approximately 140,000 soldiers and over 4,000 ships. The Mongol plan was to attack Japan from 2 sides. The Korean fleet arrived first, engaging the Japanese forces on Kyushu's shores. The samurai, fortified behind their coastal defenses, put up fierce resistance, using the stone walls and newly built fortifications to slow the Mongol advance. However, the real test was yet to come, as the larger Chinese fleet was still making its way across the East China Sea. The combined Mongol forces were expected to launch a coordinated attack that would crush the Japanese defenders. The Mongols had refined their tactics since the first invasion, bringing more advanced weapons, including siege engines and catapults, to overwhelm Japan's fortifications. With the larger fleet on the horizon, Japan's fate seemed sealed. But just as in 1274, nature had other plans. As the Mongol forces prepared to deliver a final blow, something extraordinary occurred. A massive typhoon began to form over the East China Sea. Over the next few days, this storm would grow into one of the most powerful typhoons ever recorded, a storm that would once again determine Japan's destiny. As the Mongol fleet gathered off the coast of Kyushu in late July 1281, the skies darkened and the winds began to pick up. What started as a routine summer storm quickly escalated into a full-scale typhoon. This massive storm, which the Japanese would later call the Kamikaze or divine wind, unleashed its fury upon the Mongol Armada, devastating the invasion force. The typhoon raged for days, sending towering waves crashing into Mongol ships and tearing them apart. Many of the Mongol vessels, hastily built and ill-suited for such rough waters, were smashed against the rocks or capsized by the violent seas. Thousands of Mongol soldiers, unprepared for the ferocity of the storm, were thrown overboard and drowned. The wind and rain were so intense that the surviving ships were scattered, making any chance of regrouping impossible. By the time the storm subsided, the Mongol invasion was in complete disarray. Only a fraction of the original fleet remained intact, and tens of thousands of soldiers had perished. The remnants of Kublai Khan's forces were no longer a threat, and Japanese samurai quickly eliminated any surviving Mongol troops that washed up on shore. The Kamikaze Typhoon didn't just destroy a military invasion, it saved Japan from what seemed like certain defeat. This miraculous storm became a legend, seen as an act of divine intervention sent by the gods to protect Japan. It was a turning point in the nation's history, ensuring that Kublai Khan would never again attempt to invade. Japan's survival had been secured by the forces of nature. The Japanese didn't just view the Kamikaze Typhoon as a stroke of luck, they believed it was a sign from the gods. According to Shinto, Japan's indigenous spiritual tradition, natural forces like storms were often seen as manifestations of the kami, or divine spirits. The timing of the storm that obliterated Kublai Khan's invasion fleet was seen as divine intervention, a clear sign that the gods had stepped in to protect Japan from foreign invaders. In the months leading up to the invasion, Buddhist monks and Shinto priests had prayed fervently for divine protection. Their prayers were answered in the form of the typhoon. The kami had intervened at the most crucial moment, saving Japan when it seemed like the Mongol conquest was inevitable. The Japanese came to call this storm the Kamikaze, which translates to divine wind, a fitting name for the event that saved the nation. Was it divine intervention or just good timing? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This belief in divine intervention wasn't just a momentary feeling, it took root in the cultural consciousness of Japan. The Kamikaze was seen as proof that Japan was a sacred land, favored and protected by the gods. Over time, this reinforced the idea that Japan was inviolable, a land set apart from the rest of the world. The Kamikaze didn't just save Japan, it became a spiritual symbol of the country's identity. The idea that Japan was divinely protected would influence Japanese culture, politics, and even warfare for centuries to come. It created a sense of exceptionalism and spiritual unity that bound the nation together, a legacy that persisted long after the winds of 1281 had passed. After the typhoon subsided, Japan emerged victorious. The Mongol fleet was destroyed, with the majority of the ships wrecked by the storm, leaving the invaders stranded or drowned at sea. The few Mongol soldiers who made it to shore were disorganized, stranded, and vulnerable to attack. Japanese samurai, well prepared for the invasion, swiftly moved in to eliminate any remaining Mongol forces that survived the storm. The Mongol soldiers, demoralized and scattered, stood no chance against the highly skilled and disciplined samurai warriors. For Japan, the outcome of this second invasion was nothing short of miraculous. Not only had they survived a massive Mongol onslaught, but they had also done so without the kind of heavy losses typically expected in a full-scale invasion. The divine wind had played the most decisive role in Japan's defense. As news of the Mongols' defeat spread across the islands, the Kamikaze became a symbol of Japan's strength and divine favor. Kublai Khan, on the other hand, was left reeling from this catastrophic defeat. His ambitions of extending Mongol rule into Japan were dashed, and the losses of both men and ships were enormous. The Mongol army had been weakened not by Japan's forces, but by an act of nature beyond their control. For the Mongol Empire, which had dominated vast territories and subjugated numerous nations, the defeat at Japan's shores was a rare and humiliating failure. Kublai Khan would never attempt another invasion of Japan. His attention turned elsewhere, and Japan remained independent. For the Japanese, the victory was celebrated as proof that their land was sacred and that no foreign force could conquer them while they had the favor of the gods. The Kamikaze Typhoon became much more than a military victory. It was woven into the very fabric of Japan's cultural and spiritual identity. The belief that Japan was uniquely protected by the gods gave rise to a strong sense of exceptionalism. This narrative that Japan was a sacred land destined to be free from foreign domination resonated deeply with the Japanese people and influenced their worldview for centuries. The story of the Kamikaze was passed down through generations as a key part of Japanese folklore. It became a symbol of national resilience, and the idea that Japan had been saved by divine intervention reinforced the belief that their country was unique and invincible. Over time, this spiritual view of the Kamikaze became intertwined with the samurai's warrior code. The samurai were seen not only as military defenders, but also as protectors of Japan's sacred destiny. This belief in divine protection also fostered a sense of isolationism. Japan saw itself as different from the rest of the world, a nation blessed by the gods, untouched by the political struggles of other countries. This helped strengthen Japan's resistance to foreign influence and shaped its interactions with other nations throughout its history. The Kamikaze legend became a defining part of Japan's national identity, instilling pride and reinforcing the idea that their land was not only physically protected by its surrounding seas, but also spiritually safeguarded by the gods. The Kamikaze Typhoon wasn't just a historical event. It became a foundational myth that shaped how Japan viewed itself, its place in the world, and its relationship with the divine. This legacy would echo through centuries of Japanese history, influencing everything from politics to cultural beliefs. Centuries later, during World War II, the idea of the Kamikaze would re-emerge, but in a drastically different context. As Japan faced growing pressure from the Allied forces, the concept of a divine wind protecting Japan once again entered the national consciousness. This time, however, the Kamikaze was not a natural phenomenon, but a desperate military tactic: suicide. Missions carried out by pilots who believed they could embody the spirit of the original Kamikaze. Kamikaze pilots, flying planes loaded with explosives, would deliberately crash into Allied ships in an attempt to slow or stop the enemy's advance. These missions were seen as acts of ultimate sacrifice for the homeland, and the pilots believed they were continuing the legacy of the Kamikaze winds that had saved Japan from the Mongols centuries earlier. To them, their suicide missions were not just military actions, but spiritual ones, as they believed they were once again acting as the gods' instruments to protect Japan. The Japanese government used the legend of the Kamikaze to inspire and mobilize both soldiers and civilians. The memory of the divine wind was invoked to rally national pride and instill a sense of duty. However, unlike the storm that had saved Japan in 1281, these modern kamikaze missions ended in tragedy. Thousands of pilots died in these attacks, and Japan ultimately faced defeat in 1945. From divine winds to desperate wartime sacrifices, how do you feel about the revival of this ancient symbol? Let's discuss in the comments. The re-emergence of the kamikaze myth during World War II underscores the deep cultural resonance of this ancient event. While the 13th century Typhoon was a force of nature, the kamikaze pilot's sacrifice during World War II illustrated how historical symbols can be revived and reinterpreted, often with tragic consequences. The original kamikaze, however, remains a symbol of divine protection in the national memory, separate from its darker, wartime association. From the Mongol Empire's perspective, the defeat at Japan's shores was a devastating blow. Kublai Khan had invested enormous resources in both the 1274 and 1281 invasions, hoping to bring Japan under Mongol control. His empire had expanded across vast territories from China to the Middle East and had rarely been challenged in its military campaigns. Yet, Japan remained elusive, separated by the sea, and, as it turned out, protected by natural forces beyond the Mongols' control. The Mongol fleets, particularly in 1281, were some of the largest ever assembled. Over 4,000 ships and 140,000 soldiers were involved in the invasion, making the sheer scale of the defeat all the more shocking. The loss of so many men and ships was not just a military disaster, but also a major setback for Mongol prestige. The empire, known for its dominance and strength, had been humbled by a storm, something no general could have predicted or defended against. For Kublai Khan, the loss in Japan signaled the limits of Mongol power. Though he continued to rule vast territories, the dream of expanding into Japan was over. The defeat forced the Mongols to accept that not every conquest was achievable, and it marked one of the few times in Mongol history where an expansionist campaign ended in total failure. The Mongol defeat in Japan is a reminder of the unpredictable nature of warfare. While human strength and strategy are essential, uncontrollable forces like weather can sometimes be the ultimate deciders of history. For the Mongols, the kamikaze Typhoon was a powerful and humbling force, one that would leave a lasting mark on their empire's history. The kamikaze Typhoon wasn't just a storm, it became a legend, shaping Japan's future and forging its national identity. The divine wind symbolized the gods' protection over Japan, reinforcing the belief that their country was uniquely blessed. From the ancient battlefields of the Mongol invasions to the cultural memory that shaped Japan's worldview, the kamikaze left an indelible mark on Japanese history. Here's the fun fact we promised. Even today, the word kamikaze is still used in modern Japan. It's not just a reference to the ancient Typhoon or the World War II pilots. It's a term that can describe bold, daring, or even reckless actions. This shows how deeply the kamikaze has been woven into the fabric of Japanese culture, both historically and linguistically. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most extraordinary events. If you enjoyed exploring this moment with us, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to Armchair Archaeology for more deep dives into the past. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. Let us know in the comments what other ancient stories you'd like us to uncover next. Until our next discovery, keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay curious.